The winning blueprint presents.
In the lab room.
Welcome back. You're in the lab room. I'm your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. And I told you 11-5 was as good as I could get this weekend. And that's what I was going to get. And that's exactly what I did. The two Monday night games went as to be expected. I did not expect the blowout in the first game, but it happens. You know, a team turns the ball over. Other team takes full advantage of those turnovers. Things happen. And so you got a blowout in that first game, but the end result for both games was what I thought it was going to be. And that was the Ravens getting the victory, and that was the Chargers going on the road and beating the Oakland Raiders. And that's exactly what happened. And those two wins put me at 11-5 for the weekend. Now, while that's not great, it's good for the first weekend of football. Expect the unexpected in week one of the NFL football season. And so, again, you're not going to hear me complain. Although I'm not satisfied, I will not rest until I reach my goal of a perfect week, which may never happen, but that'll keep me hungry. That'll keep me motivated to be better each and every week. But I told you I could have been easily 8-8 this week, 7-9, 9-7. So 11-5 is not a bad mark to start the year off with. And so I'll take it. I'll run with it. I'll improve on that this week. But before we start getting into the happenings of the upcoming week, we have to finish off and put a bow on the week that was week one with these last two Monday night games. So we start in our first Monday night matchup, which saw the Cincinnati Bengals travel to Baltimore to take on their divisional rivals, the Baltimore Ravens. And this was a game that I thought that the Ravens were going to be too much for the Bengals to handle. Again, the Ravens, and along with the Steelers, are the bullies of that division. The AFC North, for all intents and purposes, is going to be won by one of those two teams, either the Ravens or the Steelers. And they're the bullies. They charge everyone else rent to play in that division. And so it was time for the Cincinnati Bengals to pay up. And that's what I expected to happen. And that's exactly what happened. And so let's talk about how the game went down and what I saw throughout the course of the game. The first thing that I noted was that you can tell when teams get speed and how they like to utilize it. And every team in the league, once they get some speed, they get a little excited and they start trying to find ways to use that speed. Thus is the case with the Ravens. They have speed with Torrey Smith. This is evident. They know it. You know it. The rest of the league knows it. So what did they do first play of the game? Play action fake, up top, Torrey Smith, bomb, down to about the 20-yard line. Just like that, the Ravens get a big chunk of yardage through the air, and Torrey Smith was the recipient of the pass. But that wasn't it for him on the night, and they looked to get him involved early and often. Early being the first play of the game, and often they went back on the next possession. They ran a reverse. The very next play, they ran a double reverse, and they were, and that one happened to be botched. It didn't go well, but you knew what was coming. They were trying to get the ball into Torrey Smith's hands early and often, and he's going to be a weapon for the Ravens in this 2012 season. And he looked good in his rookie campaign. I had doubts about him, as I do about most Maryland receivers, because a lot of them have the tendency to be invisible at times. They'll have a spectacular game where they have 7 catches for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns, and in the next 2 weeks have a combined 3 catches for 27 yards. That's what Maryland receivers do. And so I was a little afraid that he was going to have that problem. And he had an issue with dropping the football in college. So I thought that might kind of spill over into his NFL career. But that hasn't been the case for the most part since he's joined the Ravens. He's looked good. He's used his speed to get on top of DBs, and he's made them pay when he's gotten on top of them. He's going to be a weapon for the Ravens in this 2012 season. Also, you know that I was going to talk Joe Flacco when talking about the Ravens in this game. Joe Flacco had a magnificent game. And not only was it a magnificent game, he was unconscious in this game. He was making throws off of his back foot, not being able to step into it. And we're talking 40, 50 yards down the field on the money. Pinpoint accuracy. You couldn't have ran up and handed the ball to Anquan Boldin on that touchdown pass any better. You couldn't have done it. He breastfed Anquan Boldin on a pass that he didn't get to step into. There was pressure in his face. He just flicked his wrist. Booyah. Touchdown. Joe Flacco is the truth. I can't tell you enough, and I can't state it enough, that Joe Flacco is a fringe elite quarterback in this league. And once he gets the help from the rest of his surrounding cast, he's going to take this Ravens team to a Super Bowl here in the near future. Joe Flacco is the truth at the quarterback position. You may not want to hear me, or you may not want to listen to me, but I know you hear me. You hear me. You may not be listening, but you hear me. Joe Flacco is a fringe elite quarterback in this league. Pay the man. Give him his money. Benjarvis Green-Ellis looks like a solid addition to the Cincinnati Bengals roster. I wasn't really sure what that move was going to do for them initially when they made it. You're basically trading off Cedric Benson for Benjarvis Green-Ellis. Of course, a lot younger, but still seems to be the same back in my estimation. However, he seems to add that extra element of toughness, especially in the red zone, where he just has a nose for the goal line. He smells it, and he finds ways to get in when other guys fall short. And so he was effective all night. He wasn't a difference maker per se, but he was effective. And this was the Ravens defense he was going up against, and he gashed them a few times. And he ran hard. He got the tough yards, and when he got around the end zone, he got in. And so he's going to be a good addition for this Cincinnati Bengals team, I think, for this 2012 season. I remember there was a point in time where there was speculation and there were grumblings coming out of Ravens camp that Jacoby Jones might not even make the roster. And I thought, how asinine is that? They went out and sought that man in free agency, brought him in because they know what he can do, how explosive he can be in the return game. And he also doubles as a dual threat in the passing game as a receiver. I was like, how asinine is that to think that he won't make this roster? The Ravens aren't that deep at receiver. How dare you talk about this man not making the roster? Lo and behold, first week of the season, Jacoby Jones is out making a difference. And I thought that early in this game, he came up with big catches on third down for chunks against this Bengals secondary that was not a bad secondary last year. And they have a lot of their pieces back on that defense in that secondary. And so I thought he had an excellent start to his 2012 campaign and an excellent start to his Ravens career. And I think that Jacoby Jones, again, just like I spoke to with Torrey Smith, he's going to be a great asset for the Baltimore Ravens this season. And Joe Flacco, he's starting to get more and more tools to work with out there receiver. And the more tools you give him, the more you're going to see Joe Flacco start to exploit defenses in the passing game. I want to veer away from the game for a second. And I don't hang around for a lot of halftime shows. I'm not a guy that watches a lot of pregame shows either. And so I actually stuck around for halftime on this Monday night game in particular. And how awesome is the soundtracks that they do for the Monday night telecast? This is my first time seeing it. They may have been doing it last year. They may have been doing it for 2 years. I don't know because, again, I don't stick around for halftime. I find something to do normally. But how awesome was that to hear, Michael Vick saying, hey, they talking crazy over there. How dare they say that we can't block them? We work too hard for them to be talking crazy like that. Or to just hear guys, Arian Foster telling some random Miami Dolphins defensive back, what's your name? Who are you? I don't know you. Turn around. Let me see your name. Let me see your name. I don't know you. It's funny. It's just funny because a lot of times you want to know what's going on out on the football field. If you never played football, then you don't have an idea of what's really going on out there. If you've played before, you know a lot of the trash talk and a lot of the things that are being said and done on the football field. But if you've never played before, it gives you insight. I've played before. I of course, not at a level anywhere near the NFL or college, but I know a lot of what goes on the football field. A lot of the trash talking, a lot of the, the craziness that goes on the field between the white lines. So it doesn't surprise me, but it's always fun to hear guys spouting off and hear what, guys are saying on the sidelines, what they're saying to the referees, what they're saying to their teammates, what they're saying to opposing players. Because some guys don't talk trash, some guys do. Some guys always have something to say to the referees. Some guys have something to say when they get on the sideline. And it's always fun to hear what's going on the field, on the sidelines during the course of a game. And so I thought that was neat. I mean, again, you get it on NFL Network with the sound effects, but this was a little bit more in-depth because this was actually random games. Like with FX, they usually narrow in on a particular game or they have a particular player mic'd up, where this was just random games. You went from one game to another game to another game to another player to another player. That was great. I enjoyed that. So we go back to the game, and I noted this guy jumped off the screen at me, and I saw him in the preseason, but I brushed him off. I really didn't think much of him, but he can't be ignored now. He's going to be a problem this year for opposing defenses, and I love the way that the Bengals are using him. And that's Andrew Hawkins. This is a small 5'9" receiver / running back hybrid in the mold of a Darren Sproles, and he's going to be a problem. He's quick, he's fast, he's shifty, he can move, he can get in and out of his cuts, and he's going to be a problem out in space. If you're trying to cover him with a backer, if you're trying to cover him with a safety, you're at a disadvantage. And I'm going to tell you what, if they can find ways, creative ways to get him the football, get him out in space, whether it's through screens, wide receiver screens, screens out of the backfield, dump offs, and just short routes, slants, outs, anything that gets him the ball out in space, he's going to be dangerous. Even just getting him the ball on a hitch, just anything to get it in his hands and get him on the move, he's going to be a dangerous weapon. I'd love to see him on punts and kickoffs. If I'm the Bengals, I would like to utilize him as much as possible. Get everything I can get out of this guy because he's a game changer. He has that type of speed and that type of ability. And I can see them utilizing him in a myriad of ways and him paying dividends for them. Watch out for Andrew Hawkins. One thing that is undeniable when you watch a Ravens game, and I questioned this going into the game, but I had questions, never doubts, just questions, because these guys are like machines, especially Ray Lewis. But Ray Lewis and Ed Reed are still going strong. And Ray Lewis dropped, the pounds in the offseason. It's been well documented. And they talked about it during the telecast about him riding his bike X amount of miles every single day, drinking some kind of tomato or vegetable concoction every day, and it helped him drop the weight. He looks fabulous. He's moving around great, and he's the same Ray Lewis that he's been for the past decade and a half, and he's going to anchor this defense as he's done for the last 15 years. Ed Reed is still a nuisance in that secondary. He picked off a pass, took it to the house. He's doing the same things that he's been doing over his Hall of Fame career. And these two guys are going to continue to be the backbone of this Ravens defense, and they're still going strong. And you question guys like them and London Fletcher and Rondé Barber and these guys who just seem like Iron Men, who don't seem to get slowed down by Father Time, where other guys, they hit a wall at 30 or 33. These guys are 36, 37 years old, and they're still out there getting it done, and better than 60, 70% of the league, and better than guys, a third of their age. And so it's amazing to watch these guys play. It's a marvel that they're still able to do what they do, and they're still playing at a high level. Ed Reed and Ray Lewis are two of the most productive players in NFL history on the defensive side of the football, and they're going to continue to be the centerpieces of this Ravens defense. That was evident in this game, and it's going to continue throughout the 2012 season. Last but not least, what was most evident in this game, and I already had talked about it in the preview for this game, the Bengals aren't ready yet. They're just not ready to contend with the big boys of this division. And it's no fault of their own. They're just not ready. They don't have the experience. I told you. I love what they're doing with their roster. It's littered with talent. It's littered with young players who are developing into Pro Bowl players. However, talent alone and youth alone, or those two together, aren't going to be enough, because it's something that they're missing that it's going to take a while to get. And it's actually two things. And I think they are on their way to getting the toughness that it takes in this division. You can't be soft in this division, and I don't think by any means that the Bengals are soft. They play great defense. They're hard-nosed, but they're not at the level of the Ravens and the Steelers. Their toughness is not there yet. But the thing that they don't have that is going to take a while to get is that experience. They don't know how to get it done in hostile environments, on the road, against tough ball clubs. And that's what you're going to have to do to take that next step. And I talked about that. They don't have the toughness, and they don't have the experience yet ready to come and challenge the throne of either the Steelers or the Ravens. And so they have a while to go. But what they have going on is very promising, and they're going to be around, but they're not ready to have that torch passed to them quite yet. And that was evident in this game. And all in all, everything that I've just said amounted to a 44-13 victory, blowout victory for the Baltimore Ravens over the Cincinnati Bengals. So not only does that take the Ravens to 1-0 overall in the season, but it takes them to 1-0 in the division against a team that came into the season and still has, it's week one, still has a legitimate shot at competing for this division. But I think the Ravens sent a message out, sent a statement to these Bengals that they have a long way to go, a long ladder to climb, a long mountain to climb before they can challenge them for the AFC North championship title in that division. And before I go, I think I need to say this. Can I get the 40 burger alert? 40 burger, 40 burger, 40 burger, 40 burger, 40 burger. I had to do it. Sorry, Cincinnati. You got a 40 burger put on your skull. 44 points on Monday night. That's embarrassing. You have to be better. And it happens, but to the good teams, it doesn't happen too often, if at all. And so you got to be better than giving up 40 points. We move on to the second game of this doubleheader on Monday night, Week 1, 2012 NFL season. And it saw the San Diego Chargers looking to jockey for early position in the division in the AFC West against one of their AFC West rivals, the Oakland Raiders. And I said before the game on the preview show that I didn't think that the Chargers could afford to lose this game. And on the defensive side of the ball, they came out with that sense of urgency. They played a solid game all around on the defensive side of the football. But on the offense, it's a lot of questions to be answered. But you always like answering questions with a win. You'll go back to this drawing board and figure out what it is you did wrong, find ways to execute better. But it's always easier to do that when you're doing it coming off of a W. And so the Chargers would gladly take this win, move forward, and try to be better in week 2. But let's talk about this game in depth and what I saw and why it was they won and why it was that the Raiders lost. This Raiders team continues to be somewhat of a disappointment, especially if you're a Raiders fan, because you hear good things every year, and you have a new head coach, so you have to remember that it's going to be a process. Whatever you do this year, it's going to be done, and it's going to be done in a form that takes a while longer than most teams, because it's going to be a process because you have a new head coach. And so the Raiders offense, and they were missing integral parts of this offense. Jacoby Ford, someone that they look to not only as a receiver, but probably even more so as a threat in the return game. He was absent. And their big play receiver, Denarius Moore, from a year ago, he did not play as well. And again, I talked about this in their lab report, in their experiment. These are two receivers who are constantly hurt. And when you have guys who can't stay healthy, it's hard to rely on them. So this was a big test for the Raiders to see if you had the depth that you thought you might have to be able to perform on a week-to-week basis, knowing that Jacoby Ford and Denarius Moore will probably not play, the remaining 15 games. They won't play all 15 of those games. You're going to go stretches without one or the other, or maybe even both of them at the same time being out of the lineup. And so you need to know that you have guys who can step up in their absence. It was shown in this game that that is not the case. There are no threats out wide when you take those receivers out of the mix. Darius Hayward-Bay, who the Raiders are looking for to have a breakout season, he did not show up on Monday. They started a undrafted rookie, Rod Streeter. He did not perform well, had several drops, and had plays that were there to be made that he just didn't make. And as the season progresses, maybe he'll get better. Maybe he'll make these plays. But the stage was too big for him on Monday night, as he did not make plays that were there to be made. To start out this game, if you were watching, everything was short for the Raiders. The passing game was very short, and they were trying to stay ahead of the chains. They were looking to be an on-schedule offense. And for the most part, it was unsuccessful. It didn't really yield any points early on. And at some point, you felt like they have to take a shot down the field, threaten this defense, and get them to loosen up, because after a quarter and a half of seeing dink and dunk offense, I think the Chargers really realized that the Raiders had no intentions of really going down the field and taking any shots. You looked at Carson Palmer's numbers throughout the first half and even through the first 3 quarters, and they were solid numbers, but he was averaging less than 10 yards per completion, which lets you know that they weren't going down the field. It was a pass to the flats, an out, slant, comebacks. And so everything was short to intermediate for this passing game. And the Chargers realized that, and they started to compact things and make it harder for this Oakland Raiders offense to succeed. And thus you saw a lot of 3-and-outs. You saw a lot of the Raiders struggling to make it past midfield, and they really never threatened the San Diego Chargers on the scoreboard. And it was a large reason why was because they didn't push the ball down the field, and I don't think they had the confidence to do so because of the lack of playmakers out wide at receiver. Also noticed early in this game, they made a concerted effort to get the ball in the hands of Darren McFadden, and for good reason. He's their best player on offense. He's their playmaker on the offensive side of the football. And so it made sense for them to try to get him the ball early. But and they tried to do it in a different assortment of ways, whether it was handing him the football, of course, or splitting him out wide, sending him in motion to run a wide receiver screen, dumping him off the ball in the flats, or just running a wide receiver or running a screen for him. They did a number of things to try to get him the football. Ultimately, most of them weren't successful. He didn't really have a signature play in this game or a huge gain of note. They did a good job of bottling him up, making sure that they corralled him. And I thought the Raiders really forced the issue early on trying to get him the football. Instead of letting it come natural, it really didn't work in their favor. And honestly, he was their whole offense in the first half. Anything that they had going for them in the first half came off of the legs of Darren McFadden for the most part. And so you knew if the Raiders were going to do anything in this game, it was going to be because of Darren McFadden, because they weren't making plays out wide at the receiver position, and they have an underwhelming tight end group. And so you knew whatever was going to happen, it was going to happen because of Darren McFadden and his legs. You also look at the Raiders, and the first thing that comes to mind when thinking of the Raiders each and every year is penalties. And you can take the Raiders and change their head coach, change their philosophy, and change their strategy, try to give them and implement some form of discipline for them. But the fact of the matter still remains that they're the Oakland Raiders. And you can't change a tiger's stripes. And the Raiders are still an undisciplined team that makes mistakes. And they committed costly penalties in this game, especially Tommy Kelly jumping offsides on several critical third downs early in this ball game, giving the Chargers extra possessions and extra opportunities to put points on the board. And watching this game early, you knew points were going to be at a premium. And so giving them a first down on third down is unacceptable. But this is what the Raiders do continuously. They had several pass interference penalties and holdings and things of that nature. And they were just doing what the Raiders do, which is get penalties and give teams opportunities to score points and kill drives with what they do on offense, getting their fair share of penalties on the offensive end as well. And so I documented that penalties are still an issue for the Oakland Raiders thus far in the 2012 season. Maybe as the season goes along, they'll get better. But like I said in the preview, I don't trust the Oakland Raiders. And this is a big reason why. Watching this game, I thought Phillip Rivers looked excellent. He didn't try to do too much. He played within the flow of the game. I thought last year he pressed a lot, and hence he had a lot of turnovers. He was un-Phillip Rivers-like last year, and I thought it was because he pressed. He felt like he needed to be the one to win the game by himself for the San Diego Chargers. And instead of him being an asset to the Chargers last year, I thought that he was an hindrance in many ways because of his play at times. And so I thought he looked good. He was solid in that first half. He didn't force the issue. He made the throws that were there. He took what the Raiders defense was giving him, and he was accurate as Phillip Rivers normally is. However, they only had 10 points to show for it. And that was the disappointing part. If you were a Chargers fan watching this game, is that you felt like you were carving up this Raiders defense, but you weren't taking advantage of every opportunity that was given to you. And you felt like, okay, if we get opportunities, we have to try to score and punch it in. Again, watching the game, you knew points were going to be at a premium. And so scoring touchdowns when the opportunity was there needed to happen. And I'll talk a little bit about that more later on in my discussion as we get to, that portion of my notes. Also, the Raiders showed me a new level of ineptitude during the course of the game in the third quarter. They had a sequence where the Chargers were offsides, and so they had 1st and 5. They proceeded to go the next 3 plays and end up with 4th and 6. Now that's really hard to do, especially that being that most teams after getting an offsides on 1st down like to run the ball to see if they can pick up the remaining 5 yards, or at least see if they can make it 2nd and short. The Raiders found a way to not only not gain another yard, but actually lose a yard, have to punt. And I thought this was a pivotal point in the game because they were moving the ball on this possession a little bit. They weren't already in Chargers territory yet, but they were getting close. And this was the first semblance of life that they had in quite a while. It wasn't the whole game or anything like that, but it was quite a while since they had really started to move the ball, get a few 1st downs, start to get confidence with this offense. And then to have that happen, lose a yard, have to punt. You go to punt and you have the snap skipped back to your punter, Shane Leckler, who is your Pro Bowl punter. So you count on him to flip field position, pin the other team. He didn't even get a chance to do what it is he's so great at doing because the ball is skipped back there. The Chargers rush gets back there, tackles him, turnover on downs. Chargers are in business. This Raiders defense, however, and this needs to be stated, they stood up all game long for these Raiders. This offense and these special teams put the Raiders in precarious situations time in and time out again. And this defense was the backbone of this team in this game as they continuously stood up and hardened and stiffened in the red zone after turnovers, after bad execution by the special teams, and held the Chargers to field goals. The Chargers kicked 5 field goals in this game. Nate Kading was 5 of 5 in his first game back since the injury last year that cost him the majority of his 2011 season. And he looked good back there kicking field goals. And he was 5 for 5. And the Chargers needed every single field goal that they could get because they weren't putting the ball in the end zone and scoring touchdowns. Which leads me to my next point. I said I was going to come back to this later on in my notes. Antonio Gates does not look to be the same dangerous Antonio Gates that we've seen for the first 8 or 9 years of his career. He looks to be a different receiver right now. And they said he's healthy. And during the course of this game, he hurt his ribs. But before he hurt his ribs, he was dropping passes. He had key drops in this game, including an early touchdown. What would have been an early touchdown pass for Phillip Rivers in the back of the end zone went right through his hands. He dropped a deep ball that Phillip Rivers put right on the money. It would have been about a 40, maybe 45-yard gain. He might have been able to make the defender miss and score potentially on that play. Instead, he has the ball go right through his hands again. It was if he had grease on his gloves instead of them being sticky and catching the football. I don't know what's going on with Antonio Gates, but the Chargers need him in order to function fully as a potent offense. If he can't give them what he's given them in the past, this Chargers offense is going to be a lot less potent than it's been in the past. He has to be back to the form that made the Chargers offense #1 in the league in 2010. And so he has to be better for this San Diego Chargers offense. If they can't afford for him to be dropping passes on critical 3rd downs, dropping passes in the end zone and having to settle for field goals, and dropping passes down the field that will help this offense score points. He has to be the Antonio Gates of the past and not the Antonio Gates that seems like he's on a steady decline. Both of these teams looked good on the defensive side of the ball. I thought that Sean Phillips is starting to get his legs back under him after dealing with injuries the past 2 seasons. He looks good. He had 3 sacks in this game. And they were getting at the Carson Palmer later in the game when they realized the Raiders had no other option but to pass. And they started to pin their ears back and get pressure on Carson Palmer. And I thought that both of these defenses showed well in their first outing of the season. They both did an adequate job of keeping the other team out of the end zone, getting the ball back to their offenses in a lot of possessions. And I felt like when put in precarious situations, the Raiders defense in particular stood up and made a stance and did not allow that Chargers offense to score touchdowns. And I thought both defenses did a good job of stopping the run. Neither team was that effective running the football. And the Raiders have to address their offensive line, especially the right tackle position. I talked about this in their L.A.B report and experiment. Khalif Barnes is not a starting left or right tackle in this league. Joe Barksdale is sitting there. I don't know if he's struggling in practice or not, but I don't know if you can do a lot worse than Khalif Barnes. And so I don't see why you wouldn't give Joe Barksdale a shot at right tackle. If you don't think he's the answer, slide someone else out there. Shift this line around a bit, but don't make the whole offense suffer because one man cannot get his job done consistently. And he was the one that was being victimized on those Sean Phillips sacks. He was getting beat immediately off the ball. He was slapping his hands down. He's much quicker. And Khalif Barnes is not fleet of foot. And so fast, speed rushers will beat him off of the ball more times than not. And so the Raiders have to address this. And also they have a long snapper issue to address as well. That's one of those positions that unless you have an issue there, you don't even talk about it. It's a non-factor. And you don't pay attention to the long snapper until they do something wrong. And in this case, their long snapper on a kickoff or a punt, return, got himself ran into by a teammate, got a knee in the back of his head, had concussion-like symptoms, and did not return to the game, and the Raiders suffered because of it. No team carries more than one long snapper on their roster, so this could happen to anyone. But they couldn't get the ball from the center to the punter for the remainder of the game with any kind of consistency, and it cost them points in a game where we knew points were going to be at a premium. And so, again, now the Raiders have something else they have to address. When is the long snapper going to be back? They're going to have to probably hit the streets, find someone to come in and give them some production until they can get their center or long snapper back. And it cost them in this game. Had he been healthy and he'd been able to snap the ball back to Shane Lechler, I don't know if they win the game anyway, but I tell you what, it would have given them a better opportunity. And the way this defense was playing, who knows if they don't come up with some sort of play with the Chargers being pinned deep in their own territory because of Shane Lechler and that leg. Who knows if this isn't a different outcome. But whatever the case may be, the Raiders are who we thought they were. To quote Dennis Green, they are who we thought they were. And I said it in my lab experiment. I said it in their lab report that I titled, and it's funny because I titled my experiment for the Raiders, Different Year, Same Raiders. Or it was actually titled New Year, Same Raiders. And that's what we got thus far in the 2012 season. Again, it's early. Hard to say that this is what the Raiders are going to be throughout the course of the 2012 season. But if this game is any indication of what we're going to get moving forward, then it's a new year, but same Oakland Raiders. And this season, as I marked in my lab report in the experiment, this season is on pace for a 6-10 finish. Now, I will taper what I've said with this. They were missing guys who make a difference. Jacoby Ford leads the league last 2 seasons in kickoff returns for touchdowns. That's a big part of what the Raiders do on the special teams front. Jacoby Ford and what he's able to do in the kickoff return department. You also look at Denarius Moore, and this is a guy that made big plays for the Raiders last year in the passing game, and this was lacking. This was very, very evident in that Monday night game that they had no playmakers at the skill positions out wide. And so his presence back along that receiving corps puts probably a lot of these receivers back into their regular roles. You know, you had guys out of position trying to be something that they weren't. So maybe with the addition of these guys, Jacoby Ford and Denarius Moore, maybe the Raiders would look a lot better on the offensive side of the football than they did on Monday night. And I expected the Raiders to lose this game. I expected the Raiders to struggle because I don't trust the Raiders, and you see why. That's the proof. And all of that amounted again to a Chargers victory, 22-14 over the Raiders. Again, running their record to 1-0, and more importantly, 1-0 in the division. They can't afford to fall behind the Broncos this early in the season, and because the Broncos are who they're chasing. Everyone in that division is chasing. And so I think the Broncos are going to be the class of that division for the 2nd year in a row. And if you want to keep pace, if you want to keep Norv Turner's job, you're going to have to start this season off fast. And losing wasn't an option for the Chargers. And they went out and they found a way to get it done in a very sloppy game. Nonetheless, still a W, and you'll take it any way you can get it in the National Football League. So that's going to do it for this episode. It's a touchdown, so you can go ahead and throw it up. You tack on this quick extra point, and that's going to be, that's going to do it for week 1. It's in the books now, and as we move on to week 2, the replacement officials in the first week of the season weren't overly egregious. Okay, there were a couple of calls in several different games that, of course, could have been better. Watching different games, you could see, just like with the real officials, different crews have different ways of calling a game. They see it through a different lens. And so you had some games like the New Orleans-Washington game where I thought everything was called. They were calling every single penalty. If it was close, it was a flag. Then you had games like the Bears game where they were letting them play. They weren't calling as many subjective calls as they were, fouls that you knew were set in stone, like your procedure penalties, like offsides or a false start or illegal, formation or illegal shift. They weren't calling the subjective penalties as much. And so you see it vary from game to game, but for the most part, the one terrible call or terrible ruling from the weekend was in the Cardinals game with the Seattle Seahawks, where they gave the Seahawks essentially 4 timeouts. You could argue that it was only 3 and it was fine what they did, but in no point, no circumstance do you just give a team an extra timeout because a player was injured, and that's essentially what these officials did. Again, it didn't affect the outcome of the game. It almost did, but it didn't. The Cardinals still won, and so a big deal won't be made out of it. But nonetheless, they have to get the real officials back in the game, though. These replacement officials did not do a terrible job. The product on the field was still good, but they're still missing calls out on the field. There was a call in the Steelers game where Peyton Manning had 12 players on the field and they didn't call it, and it happened in other games as well where watching it on Monday night, you saw Norv Turner going nuts because the Raiders had 12 guys in the huddle, and he's demanding, he's very animated. Throw the flag is a penalty. They got 12 in the huddle. And they finally throw the flag because of Norv Turner telling them they got 12 in the huddle, and they actually counted. And then it's funny because you hear when the official turned his mic on, and you could hear Darius Hayward-Bay say, "You didn't even know. You didn't even know we had 12 in the huddle." And so these officials have to be better. They just need to get the real officials back. And that's the fact of the matter. At the end of the day, they just need to get the real officials who eat, sleep, and breathe NFL rules and know exactly what's going on. They need to have these guys back in the fold so that this is not even a question. And that'll do it for this episode of In the Lab Room. I thank you for joining me again. Love to hear from you. Hit me up in the inbox, inthelabroom@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook. Like me on Facebook at In the Lab Room. I'm also on Twitter at In the Lab Room. That's the Twitter handle. I'll see you again on Wednesday. Come back and enjoy some more of In the Lab Room. I'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you same time, same place. I'm out.